choosing your first tarot deck can be intimidating. Maybe you've already looked online, or if you're lucky enough, gone into your local esoteric store and seen hundreds, if not thousands, of different types of decks available to you. Should you start with the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, the Morgan Greer deck, the Hermetic Tarot, the Mythic deck, or even at the moment the RuPaul Drag Race Tarot? Who knows? That simple purchase can turn into a bit of a nightmare, especially if you don't know what you're looking for or what some of the terminology may mean on the packet. You know that you want to start reading tarot, but you're not quite sure which deck to start with. If this is your first tarot deck, I am here to help. So please like and subscribe to my channel and stay tuned whilst I help you choose your first tarot deck. Okay, first things first, let's address something that you might have heard about, you might have read about, or you might have been told. That's the kind of folkloric advice that you're supposed to be given your first tarot deck as a gift. Don't wait for that. I was given my first deck as a gift. It did come in very handy, but you might be waiting for a long time and you might kind of get a deck that you don't really want to learn or you don't really love. So my advice is to go out and buy your first deck and look for something that inspires you and makes you want to learn to read it and makes you want to understand the symbols and the ideas underneath it. This means jumping into the world of tarot where there are hundreds of decks. So let me go through my tips of looking at and kind of show you a few styles of tarot that might help in that decision making. First of all, there's kind of three main styles of tarot that you're going to see. There are the historical decks that are, historical replicas of old decks. So these are mostly stemming out of the game of tarot. They were designed to play things like tarocchi, and they were actually like a playing deck. So these aren't necessarily designed as divination tools. But some people love them, including me, and they kind of date from around about the 1500s all the way through to about the 1800s, and they include styles like the Marseille, which I will show you in a minute. Another style of tarot is kind of the esoteric style of tarot. These are more around divination. They've been designed for divination, and it normally jumps out of a school of Western esotericism. So, for example, the Golden Dawn have the Golden Dawn Tarot, but also the very famous Rider-Waite-Smith deck, which I will also show you in a minute. Other schools of witchcraft and esotericism include the OTO, Wicca, Druidism. All those will kind of have a style of tarot that is the embodiment of those teachings from that magical school. And the last kind of style of tarot is the more artistic and inspired decks. These are when an artist or an author wants to kind of express themselves in the medium of a tarot deck, and they want to illustrate their personal meanings or their personal understandings of those cards. They can differ from the other two, so they don't necessarily have to be based on the Marseille deck or based on the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. They can just take any form that they like, as long as they kind of stick to the general pattern that is tarot, and I'll talk about that in a second. They're acceptable. So things like the RuPaul's Drag Race Tarot that I mentioned earlier, and the Art Nouveau Tarot. Those are very artistic and inspired. So first things first, you're going to want to make sure that it is a tarot deck. That kind of sounds easily done, but sometimes a bit tricky. So let me just show you a couple of ways to check. So sometimes they'll say on the box, so this is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. We call it the Smith deck because Pamela Coleman Smith authored it, and it's really important to try and kind of get her recognition on the box. So nowadays they say Rider-Waite-Smith or the Waite-Smith deck. So this one quite clearly says tarot deck. So you can be pretty assured that this is a tarot deck and you are buying a tarot deck and not an oracle deck. Here we go again on a Marseille deck, Tarot de Marseille. So this is pretty standard and pretty easy. The oracles will sometimes say oracle on the box and sometimes not. So when it doesn't say it on the box, you're kind of looking that it conforms to what tarot is. And that is roughly a split between major and minor arcana. So you're looking at a 78 card deck that has a major arcana of 22 cards. These are a trump suit that is depicting allegorical scenes, and some of these you'll really recognize from films and depictions in art. Yep. And then they've got 56 minor cards, which is very similar to the playing card decks that you might have played rummy with or cribbage, that kind of thing. So these are 4 suits. This is cups, coins, batons or wands, and swords. Sometimes these are renamed. The artist might have decided to call them something slightly different or translate them slightly differently. So I know that very famously in the 90s, Mystic Meg got rid of the suit of swords because she thought it was quite violent. So she turned it into the suit of birds. So it's not always a guarantee that it isn't a tarot deck if it's not called by these suits, but it's at least 4 suits, and they have 1 to 10, like so, and then a set of court cards, which is 4. I've mixed in some here. So 14 per suit. Okay. As long as you can check that it's got those cards, it's a 78 deck, and it's got that 20 to 56 split, then it will probably be a tarot card deck. They might be renamed. They might have renamed the major arcana. They might have renamed the suits, but it will probably be a tarot card deck. So feel free to check. Check with if you're buying it from a store, check with the person in the store that it is a tarot deck, and even ask to see whether they've got a demo pack that you can have a look. In the UK, I know that Watkins Bookshop does have display decks so that you can kind of have a look through and check. So the next bit of advice is to double check whether you want pictorial or non-pictorial pips. The minor arcana is sometimes called pips. It is literally the number cards. And there's 2 different styles that you'll see in most decks. So here in this Marseille deck, you'll notice that the number cards aren't pictorial. They're just the number of the suit. So this is 2 swords, 3 swords, 4 swords, and this is very similar to just a normal playing deck. So this is ace, there's 2, and there's 3. Now some decks, very famously the Rider-Waite, created pictorial pips. This is where they have taken the concept of the card and they've illustrated it based on the meaning of the card. So here we go, this is the 2 of swords compared to the 2 of swords. So instantly quite a lot of readers will pick up more information from this. This is where the artist, Pamela Coleman Smith, has illustrated her meaning or her understanding of what that card represents in a picture so that the reader can understand what they're looking at. Some people prefer this, some people prefer this. It really depends on the style of reading. One pro of this is that you can kind of pick up ideas or symbols or meanings by looking at the picture. So for example, this could be blind confidence. Yeah, the woman is seen with a blindfold across her face and she's holding 2 swords, so it could be blind confidence. Or we could alternatively read it as balance. She's balancing 2 swords on either side of her body. So this is where this is helpful. Where this is not helpful is that it spoon feeds a kind of a set of meanings and a set of ideas that the artist has about this card that you might not want to follow. And this is where this might be handy. So if you want your own meanings and you want to develop your own understandings, or you read more intuitively and you want to feel what you psychically pick up from the card, then this might be more handy. This most people seem to gravitate as beginners. I used to be a bit of a fan. I'm not much anymore. I kind of see these as shouty decks, and I'll show you some shouty decks in a bit. So consider whether you want pictorial or non-pictorial pips, and you'll be able to just check that in the box. Either have a look at some of the websites. I'm going to post a link to the Eclectic Tarot Forum down below. That's really great for just looking at the cards in each of the decks and seeing whether you like the look of them or not. It was kind of very helpful for me when I'm picking certain decks, just to see the pictures, or just Google the name of the deck, and then you should be able to see whether they've got pictorial pips or not. Cool. So another thing that is normally recommended is that you look for something that you like the look of and that talks to you. This is normally around artistic tarot decks. I mean, this is based on the Marseille, but you kind of get the idea. If you like the imagery, if you feel a kinship to the imagery, you are going to try and read it a little bit better and a little bit more. I've had tarot decks in the past where I've not really liked it. I don't really enjoy reading it. I don't like the images, and it doesn't really reflect what I feel about that card and what I feel about my tarot card reading. And I've never read them. It's simple as that. So a very good recommendation is to look for a deck that you find pretty, that you like the look of, that feels like is conveying some sort of meaning to you. And that's especially if you're picking an artistic tarot. So if you don't like Art Nouveau, don't buy an Art Nouveau deck. If you are more witchy, then pick a deck that is more representative of witchy things. There is a negative about this that I'm going to talk about in a little bit while, but it's mostly about how you access ways of learning that deck, and I will discuss that in a second. The other thing you can check is if you ascribe to a religious school or a magical school or a spiritual school, look to see whether they have their own deck. So the Rider-Waite was based on the very secret Golden Dawn Tarot. Arthur Waite commissioned Pamela Coleman Smith to design a deck based on the Golden Dawn's understanding of the tarot, which in turn was based on Eliphas Levi and his occultism. So you'll see in the cards that quite a lot of the symbols are very Golden Dawn. If you are a member of the Golden Dawn, if you are a brother of the Golden Dawn, then this will speak to you more than other decks. So for example, this is very hermetic, as above, so below. The red and white is going to mean something if you are in Golden Dawn, and these roses and lilies are going to mean quite a lot when you're at the Golden Dawn. It's got the 4 elemental weapons for the Golden Dawn. So if you subscribe to a religious school, have a check, see whether they have got a tarot. Another tarot card deck that is based on a magical school is the very famous Thoth deck. This was, I'm going to say this loosely, commissioned by Aleister Crowley, and it was commissioned for Frieda Harris to do the artwork. The artwork is stunning. I don't tend to read this deck, but for example, this is his Magus or Magus, however you want to pronounce it, compared to the Golden Dawn one. Yeah. So you can see that this is now looking a lot more OTO, Ordo Templi Orientis. So we're getting if this Lego wiggle. So you can start seeing the Hebrew letters for its association in the Kabbalah. You can see its planetary associations, She's used projectional geometry in the design, but this is very, very Hermes. And you're seeing some sort of magical weaponry and tools around here, and you can kind of see there's, this is very small, but kind of like the Holy Spirit symbol coming down, linking to that kind of philosophy. So that's the Aleister Crowley. You're probably going to be interested in that if you're OTO based and you want to kind of learn the OTO kind of style of tarot. These are what I call shouty decks. These are very good if you want to be told the meaning of the deck and if you want to have help with the card. They have a very specific meaning. They display that meaning very well on the cards. It's very hard to ignore it, i.e. they're shouting it. So, for example, in the minor arcana of this deck, which is relatively pictorial, you will see that this has a keyword. So Frieda Harris has designed these to have a key meaning at the bottom of the card, as well as the astrological symbols here and here, to tell you and help the person that's reading this card know what it means when they're reading a spread. This could be useful. I find it shouty. I imagine Aleister Crowley opposite me as I'm giving him a tarot card reading, and I've laid out my lovely spread and I'm kind of looking and figuring out what it means, and he'll say, that means virtue. And I say, give me a second, I'm trying to read it, but that means virtue. It's like, well, does it mean that in the context? Yes, it does. It means virtue. So you can imagine this kind of little argument that's happening between me and Aleister Crowley. Not helpful for me, who's kind of a bit more intuitive and a little bit more looking for a narrative through the cards, where a keyword's not going to help me. However, if you're using this card deck for meditation, it might be a little bit more suitable, even if you don't like shouty cards when you're reading divination decks. Same with the Rider-Waite, slightly less shouty. But still a little bit shouty for me. There's very specific meanings of specific symbols that are dotted through, and the meanings of those are very, very purposeful. It's a purposefully designed. Whereas the Marseille historical deck is a lot less. It's very much the what we kind of consider the original. It's not really. Visconti Sforza was slightly before this, which is here, but it's kind of what we kind of consider the original tarot in a lot of ways. So there's not a lot of forced meanings in this. It's very, very an image, a title, and a number. And then you can read into it what you feel or what you want. So I kind of prefer to kind of ease around these, but if you want something that's a little bit more helpful, you might kind of ease around the Rider-Waite-Smith or this kind of tarot deck. Whatever you pick is going to change the style of reading that you do ultimately. If you are picking a shouty deck like the Thoth deck or the Rider-Waite-Smith deck, that's going to change how you read. It's going to be very much like more of an English style of reading, or Western world kind of reading, where each card has a specific meaning and you read it within the placement or a spread. And you'll see those later in my videos. If you pick something that is slightly more art inspired, or maybe a historical deck, then you're probably going to be reading a little bit more intuitively. It's not so obvious what that card means. So you may rely on your previously learnt meanings, but you may also try and pick up what that means in kind of context. So what deck you choose will change the flavour of how you're reading and what you're doing with it. So that's quite an important little tidbit for you. So the only other thing that I wanted to have a quick chat about is representation in the tarot. Representation is becoming a big subject for a very good reason. and tarot should be no exception. The historical and most famous decks don't have great representation of Black, Indigenous and people of colour, and it doesn't have a great representation of gender and sexuality diversity, or how I kind of phrase LGBTQIA+. And it doesn't have a really great track record in gender stereotyping. So I'm going to just illustrate what I mean. So let's have a quick look at the Marseille deck. Marseille 1700s. I will probably put a post of kind of a history of different decks, but it's not really necessary at the moment. So if you go through this deck, you will notice that every single person is white. There is no people of colour, there is no Indigenous, and there is no Black people. So that might be a problem for you if you are from an ethnic minority, or you are from a kind of a Black, Indigenous or people of colour background where you don't feel represented in this tarot. This does have relatively good representation of gender, and I'll compare that to the Rider-Waite in a minute, but you'll notice that the women are generally of different ages and the men are generally of different ages, though sometimes it's a little bit hard to actually age them. So these are younger, there is late 20s, early 30s. And in terms of gender and sexuality diversity, not brilliant. There are a few cards that could be genderqueer or could be seen as LGBT, and I will kind of cover those when I do the deep dives into each of the major arcanas through my videos, so stay tuned for that. The Rider-Waite, let me just pull up a couple. Slightly worse, actually. So in terms of ethnicity, you will not also find any Black, Indigenous or people of colour in these tarots. The main issue that someone might have, especially if you are female, is that the cards only really display young females in the major arcana, even where it would make sense to illustrate an older woman, that it's kind of a young pretty woman. I think that this seems to be more of a reflection on the Golden Dawn. The Golden Dawn had older people like Arthur Waite, and quite a lot of the women were young, hip, trendy women like Florence Farr, that kind of younger vibe that were actresses and artists. So for example, this is the Empress. It's traditionally seen as the counterpart to the Emperor. So the Emperor, we have an old gentleman, and here on the Empress we have a very quite young, almost too young woman. This would also usually kind of illustrate a pregnancy or a motherhood. It's a very mothery card, so this is quite a young mother. Here we go on the High Priestess, someone that's supposed to be representing intuition and knowledge, and she's extremely young, very pixie faced, which is quite funny because Pamela Coleman Smith used to be called Pixie, so it could even be a representation of her, but very young for a High Priestess role. So this might not bother you, it might not bother you at all, but if it does, and you are one of those that will notice that and kind of feel a bit excluded from that tarot deck, don't buy that one. So there is this wonderful website that I did find by Little Red Tarot. It's a shop that has a page that's dedicated to Black, Indigenous and people of colour created tarot decks. I think this is brilliant. It really is fantastic. It's about time that we saw more of this. One deck that I highly recommend, because I love the look of it, is the Melanated Classic Tarot. The benefit of this is that it has a good representation of Black, Indigenous and people of colour all the way through the deck, as you can see in this image. its little quote here says representation matters, especially in the images of power and magic, which I totally agree with. The other benefit of that is it mimics the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. This is quite important for when you are learning tarot. If you pick a very unique and specific deck, it will be very hard to find things to help you learn that deck, other than what we call the little white book, which is the tiny booklet that comes inside the deck like this. And has kind of meanings and normally sometimes a bit about what the artist was thinking when they designed that card. Other than that, it'll be pretty tricky to find them in books. So most resources for learning tarot are around the traditional decks. So those would be the Rider-Waite-Smith and the Marseille. You'll normally see those kind of depicted in both, unless the author has designed their own decks and then they'll represent their own decks. So for example, Juliet Sherman Burke will probably represent the Mythic deck in most of her books. She might put another card next to it, but it will be her Mythic deck because she's designed it and she's propping it. So check to see which resources that you want to use to learn your tarot deck, and if you pick a unique and very arty and maybe even an indie designed deck, then you might have difficulties kind of picking up any book and using that as a reference. In my videos, I'm going to be trying to use this deck, which is the Tarot Marseille, the Veritable Tarot Marseille by Kris, which is a modern reconstruction of the Tarot Marseille, most similar to the 1760s Conver deck, which might mean something to you, might not, just ignore it. So I'll be using this. This is my general go-to reading deck, and I will also be using the Rider-Waite-Smith, a good old standard deck. Here we go, here's the pack. Because quite a lot of decks are based on one of the two. Very rarely will you get a deck that's been very artily designed and represent neither of these two. So I'm going to be using both of these in my videos. A tip on buying any Marseille deck, as long as it's Tarot de Marseille or TDM, will generally be very similar, other than very small details that I might be referring to. So you'll generally kind of get a very similar deck. The Rider-Waite-Smith deck, if you are buying this deck and you're not buying the Melanated Classic, then make sure that it has some sort of recognition for Pamela Colman Smith. This is becoming quite an important thing. Even though she designed these cards, it used to only be called the Rider-Waite deck after the publisher and the male author. So it's becoming very, very important to make sure that the artist is represented on the packaging. This is a donkey's old deck, so this wasn't very important back then. But I will give you a link below to kind of link to a deck that has the recognition for Pamela Colman Smith. There is a biography out as well about Pamela Colman Smith. If you buy this deck, you might be really interested in her life history, which was quite fun. She did have a background in Jamaica, which is why I find it very strange that she didn't represent any people of colour in her deck. But hey ho, it was the Victorian era. So those are the two decks that I'm going to be focusing on. You can get Marseille style decks very artily. So you briefly saw this. This is the Tarot de Noir, or rather the Tarot Noir, which is based around kind of a medieval conception of the Marseille deck. Yeah. So the artists have kind of taken the Tarot Marseille and they've reimagined it as if it was in this kind of very dark, with cream backgrounds and gold edging, medieval style. Yeah. So feel free to go and grab one of those. I think that is about it. There are LGBT tarots as well. I have seen recently one on a comedy show called The Gay Tarot, and I funny enough saw it in my local game shop in Oxford. I've not really seen that deck much, but if you feel passionately about LGBT issues, it might be worthwhile. But that's everything. So grab yourself a deck, go out and buy, have a look, research, use some of the resources that I'm going to post below in the video. So I'm going to post the Eclectic Tarot Forum so that you can see pictures of the cards. I will post a couple of links to these decks, as well as the link to the Little Red Tarot website, so that you can look at the BIPOC decks and consider buying one of those. But pick up a deck, find any deck, and carry on watching the videos. And please subscribe; it will help. Please like, please comment, and let's start reading some tarot.